And we are on air. Hey guys, this is Richard, and this is the very last of the previews I'm doing for Barrow Keep, the Den of Spies, the Kickstarter that's up right now. Let me put that on there. We are just a little over $600 away from our final stretch goal with 27 hours to go. That seems so weird. But there is the URL on screen. The last couple of previews were of character creation rules, but I want to do a preview of sort of the scenario pack, which is sort of the cornerstone of our GM tools. Modeling as much as our character creation tools are on modeled on Beyond the Wall, which is an RPG about some of the 60s and 70s young adult fantasy, and Barrow Keep being inspired by much more 80s, 90s, and 2000s young adult fantasy is following where Beyond the Wall led. And to do this preview of all the different things you can do with a scenario pack, I've invited 3 of the best GMs I know, only one of whom has actually killed my character, which would be Silviana. And I'm going to do a quick walk. Actually, I'm going to introduce them first by just letting them introduce themselves, and I'll start with Zach.
Hey, so I'm Zach, otherwise known as Great Samino. I'm a GM for Manapot Studios, and I had the pleasure of when I was starting out in RPGs, I had the pleasure of being killed by Richard in my very first game of Dungeon World. Sounds worse than it actually was. It was pretty fantastic.
All right. I'm glad that it stuck with you as a memory. Silviana.
Hi, I'm Silviana. I have been GMing for Richard in the same game for almost 2.5 years now, and I did kill him once. He chose to come back with a new character, so I must have been doing something at least okay. I will add, though, that Richard has also killed my characters multiple times in Dungeon Crawl Classics games. Once, I had 3 characters, and he killed 2 of them. So in a single session, he killed me twice. So I'll probably never repay him for that.
Hi guys.
One of them really cute bear too. I'm sorry, Justin.
Yeah, one of them was a bear named Cappy.
There was just a pause, so I was like, I'm jumping in. Hi guys, my name is Justin. I've had the distinct pleasure of being killed by Richard many times over the years. He's a great friend and introduced me to a lot of my favorite games, a lot of my favorite people to play games with. So I'm my honor to be here and hang out with him, support his Kickstarter. I also publish games under Punk Studios. I have a Kickstarter going too. Game called Kunai Academy, and one of my favorite things to do as a GM now is like the sub game of like lacing characters' plots together and trying to create one coherent story, but also giving every player something really satisfying to do. And I'm excited to talk about these like adventure generation rules because I think they do that very well.
Guys, I'm going to put the scenario pack up here. This is be kind of what the 3 GMs will be kind of walking through and kind of putting together. For those of you familiar with Beyond the Wall, you'll see some familiar tools out there that Barrow Keep will be outright borrowing from them. But this is the Wild Woods Ambassador. This is not one of the 2 I initially promised. Instead, this was made for a Dreamation session of Barrow Keep this weekend. And I decided it was so much fun and so different from the other 2. I wanted to include it as a freebie with the other 2. The other 2 are the Treacherous Kin and the Doppelganger, which are kind of on point for Barrow Keep. Those are both about tracking down people who are undermining or endangering people within the keep. And this one is the Wild Woods Ambassador, and this is a little more supernatural. It gets into the supernatural goblins who are the dominant power in the Wild Woods, and these are a little bit more goblins out of Labyrinth or other big fairy tales where they are all report to a very magical being known as the Goblin Imperator, and are themselves magical beings with the ability to shapeshift, change their appearance, and do other things that the scenario may demand. Those will be in Goblin Statistics, which will be available for the 3 systems we're supporting. Actually 4 as of last night, and will look a little bit different in each of those systems. But I wanted to kind of look at less on the mechanic side, just more on the basic adventure generation side, and have 3 people kind of walk through it. I want to kind of preview the scenario pack for you that they've been working with. First, the scenario pack begins with kind of a basic GM introduction. There is a Goblin Imperator in the woods who appoints an ambassador to the keep, but it has been generations since that ambassador has been invited to appear in the keep. And the new Archon, and in Barrow Keep, the Archon is always somebody who did not inherit the title. They just kind of came into it after the previous family sort of collapsed on itself through their own treacheries. So the new Archon is largely unaware that there's supposed to be a Goblin Ambassador, and thinks that they are in charge of the Wild Woods. Like all scenario packs in Beyond the Wall, each playbook will get a sign and portent. And you'll see for each of the 6 playbooks that I had this weekend, we have a sign or portent. It is something they briefly see, followed by a check that they can make of their ability scores, and followed by a result of information or some sort of other boon that will benefit or penalize them based on whether or not they succeed at that ability check. From there, there's a whole bunch of questions that are randomly generated, including ones that are generated from NPCs and allies and rivals that the characters create during their own character creation process. So there's places to fill in the names of allies, friends, associates that they have uncovered during their character creation process, with who has gone missing from the keep since yesterday, and which attendant or ally of the keep has the disguised Wild Woods ambassador secretly replaced. And then what rivals decide to get involved in the situation, sort of potentially spurring the PCs to action, or just generally being a thorn in their sides. And then some basic questions about the Wild Woods ambassador. Where does the Wild Woods ambassador wait for Barrow Keep's compliance? Who is the Wild Woods ambassador? And who guards the ambassador are 3 questions that we'll kind of use to sort of riff on. And with that quick intro, I think I'm going to turn this back over to the great Zamino, Zach, to tell us sort of what you came up with as you went through the scenario pack using the random tables and I gave each of these GMs kind of a sample party to kind of work with. Kind of assume that you had at least 3 PCs who were planning to show up or had created these characters. And what were you sort of planning to do with the scenario pack for your party?
Well, first thing I want to say is basically, I just love the way that this kind of scenario pack lays out all of the options. I'm usually a very improvisational GM. I tend to I hate when I have to go back over kind of like, prepared scenario notes and kind of like adventure modules. So this is actually really very well suited to my style of play. I actually have 3 PCs that are really interesting. They give me a lot of fodder for what I actually rolled, or at least I saw kind of the connections very immediately. There was Roslyn the Revenant, a former squire, murdered 100 years ago, returned to life. To lift a curse on the keep must be in the form of a rat or crow during the day. And the custom class is Revenant, essentially somebody who has come back from the grave to fulfill a greater purpose or to seek justice. The second PC is Desta the Spy, a 17-year-old court spy who's the child of a consort, but masquerading as a kitchen attendant and is a court spy, which is also a custom class with level 1. And finally, we have, sorry, that's my refrigerator. We have Tadic, the Ward of the Consort, an orphan whose seer powers actually saved the future consort's life once. Which is all this is really interesting because you get a lot of like, not only do you have the supernatural element, but you also have the more kind of quotidian kind of intrigue and subterfuge of kind of like the spying and kind of the same kind of themes that brought down the former Archon of Barrow Keep. And for the keep itself, we have laid out 3 NPCs. The Archon, who's Velo, who is a former general who is beloved by both knights and guards, but at the same time might not be the most politically savvy. There's the consort Vildan, a former professor wanting to travel and study more than she is able, which again, really great opportunity for an NPC that can get itself into trouble, herself into trouble rather. And then finally, there's the heir to the Archon throne or kind of seat, which is Vertia, a austere, haughty, but generous person who spends most of their time with a spiritual advisor. And I thought this was really interesting because immediately when I started rolling, I kind of started noticing a lot of patterns. So right off the bat with the signs and portents, I actually the Revenant. Because the Revenant, I thought of the Revenant in the signs and portent as a potentially really great foil for Rosin, and kind of see, but but for the grace of my curse go I, or this could be what Rosin could become if they don't fulfill their purpose. This one is, before play begins, each playbook has a portent of what's to come. To determine how much each character has learned, following an ability check. If you have a characters who are not using one of the playbooks, select one of the other portents below. This one's great. When you watch the keep slowly awaken after sunrise this morning, you saw someone in the garb of a grocer come into the keep laden with bags. So check wisdom. If you succeed, you notice that they strolled past the guards and skyship delivery folk unseen. If you fail, you won't remember this until someone brings up strangers coming and going from the keep. And this is really interesting because it can kind of act as either a spy working for one of the other NPCs, or perhaps even somebody kind of working a revenant or a rival revenant kind of working it for the will of the Wildwoods ambassador. So what celebration feast is coming? The heir is announcing their engagement to a member of another noble house. The fiance is secretly smitten by a goblin they saw riding along the road to court, and the goblins want to embarrass the heir. And again, I thought this was a really interesting way for that supernatural element to kind of start suffusing Barrow Keep and start really laying traps for the NPCs that the PCs can actually uncover. So for instance, the very first thing I thought of for this would be the spiritual advisor actually turning out to be the goblin who's kind of stealing the fiance, or kind of affecting this new relationship with. So who's gone missing from the keep since yesterday? Lachlan, the heir's child brother, vanished from their bed, which in this case is just a NPC that probably my players would have been had a part of their campaign, and I just rolled the 3 and ended up getting Lachlan. But this is really interesting because if a child goes missing, it can kind of be tied into folklore of goblins, or it can kind of also go into the more courtly intrigue, as we'll kind of see later. So which attendant or ally of the keep has the disguised Wildwoods ambassador secretly replaced? An apprentice sorcerer fond of one of the characters. And this is always really great because, you can have an NPC follow the players around, and if that person is a trusted NPC, you can always make people roll perception checks and see if they catch the NPC doing something that's not like them, and so they wonder if something's wrong, or if they wonder if the NPC is really being imitated or being controlled. It's really great fodder. So what rivals go to search for the missing a person accusing others of inaction and lack of concern? So list the name of the PC's rivals and minor enemies here and determine this randomly. In this case, I thought the interesting idea would be if we had a fellow called Duke Helder, who is a minor noble who kind of speaks ill of the Archon whenever possible, or kind of points out their deficiencies, but is actually secretly an insurrectionist. And so, depending on how kind of like those keys kind of line up, it could either be that Lachlan has been abducted by the Wildwoods ambassador, or has been kind of ensorcelled or taken away by supernatural means, or you could have Duke Helder using this kind of fufferall as an opportunity to try to lay the groundwork of bringing down the Archon of Barrow Keep. So where does the Wildwoods ambassador wait for Barrow's Keep compliance? An abandoned town an hour from the keep. While a few people still remember vaguely where the old town is, the trails to it are mostly overgrown and impassable to horses. So again, the idea of like this old town, maybe like either kind of reclaimed by goblins or lost to time and death. Maybe like something terrible happened there long ago. Maybe it had something to do with the goblins, or maybe it could be, you know, something to do with the Revenant. Who is the Wildwoods ambassador? Like all goblin folk, an ambassador has silvery hair and rows of sharpened predatory teeth, like those of a cat. What distinguishes them from other goblins? And this one is a bat-winged and horned. The ambassador loves riddles, tricks, and worship, which and wordplay rather, which I think really works very well with the idea of a disguised ambassador following the PCs around, because then you can easily kind of have that moment from Labyrinth where the beggar kind of reveals himself to be David Bowie or the Goblin King in disguise. And in this way, we can always have like the wings unfold from the apprentice cloak and just pull back, and you have the winged Wildwoods ambassador saying, you know, I know you've broken so many promises to me. How do I reclaim what you have taken? And finally, there's also who guards the ambassador. In addition to the 1d6 goblin attendants who work with the ambassador, who's serving as the ambassador's personal guard. And this one just kind of lined up everything. I kind of saw the A and the B plot coming together, which is I rolled 4, which was 2d4 hungry shades lured into the service from the catacombs of Barrow Keep. And I kind of think of that almost as like it could be actually interchangeable with not just the catacombs, but maybe these are catacombs underneath the old town that have stretched this far. And maybe that's kind of like the legacy is the Fae have, or not the Fae, the goblins have reclaimed that town, and they are also kind of promise breakers and oath breakers. And so I kind of see these really interesting kind of confrontations. You have the confrontation in the old town between the ambassador and between the PCs, who may believe that the ambassador is responsible for the abduction as well as for the undermining of the fiance of the heir. You have the confrontation between the heir, the fiance, and this kind of spiritual advisor, who is secretly a goblin. And it could be, you know, depending on how what the PCs are able to do, it could be that the fiance is ensorcelled, or at the same time, it could be that the fiance really has this genuine affection for this goblin, and it is up to the PCs to determine whether or not that's an outcome that they can accept. And then finally, you have the confrontation between Duke Helder or Duke Helder's servants or kind of retinue who have absconded with Lachlan, if that's a plot you begin to follow. And this is a lot. This is basically an A, B, and C plot. So I would probably stretch this over the course of maybe 2, 3, 4 sessions, because I really see a lot of fodder for maybe like a big arc or a big beat within like a small mini campaign. And that's kind of, this is really great. It all felt like it kind of came together when I started rolling the dice.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach.
Can
Silviana.
I comment on Zach's
Yeah.
first? Zach, I love the way that you used the rival mechanic to create this character who is like a real threat, and then who has the potential to become like a threat beyond this story arc, this Duke Helder character. And if he is the one who actually abducted, you know, the person who's missing and like actually did this, he becomes almost a more sinister character than the Goblin Ambassador. And so I love the idea that like using this and like, it's just a simple rival prompt. Like it's, oh, how are they involved in this story? But you can take that and make a, short campaign that sort of contains this whole arc with the Goblin Ambassador and then add in elements so that this could become like a whole long story. And I love that it gives you the ability to do that.
And it's fantastic too, because if it could even be that the season long reveal or the long term campaign reveal is that Duke Helder is responsible for the downfall of the previous Archon, and it's up to the PCs to make sure that like history doesn't repeat and that he doesn't get that second shot at the seat. So there's so much you can do with this, and that's assuming they manage to find Lachlan in time.
Nice. So Silviana, what did you get?
Yeah. Okay. Well, first, let me tell you about my player characters. So we have Adverix, the wielder, who is a fighter and a child of the Archon. And they are, in this story, they are the younger sibling of the heir, which will become important later. We have Raken, the hostage, who is a beast bound, which is like a person who has a strong connection with animals and has an animal companion. And he has an animal companion who's a wildcat named Suna, who's also an important character. And then the third one is Alba, the spy, and she is the child of the consort, but nobody knows that. And so she's masquerading as the consort's squire. So my players are planning a wedding. I rolled on the first table what celebration feast is coming, and I got the heir is hosting the wedding of a cousin. The cousin has goblin blood, and goblins are offended. The cousin must ask for their blessing on the marriage. So I love this because since Adverix is part of the family of the heir, of course, Adverix also a cousin of this person who's getting married. So, of course, part of the bridal party has to help plan the wedding. So all the players have to plan the wedding. The person who has gone missing is Adverix's ally, their best friend, Lawrence Gandersteel, was given a minor task or a message about the upcoming feast, but left it undone before disappearing. So Lawrence is also part of the bridal party, is like also a friend or cousin, and is kind of a slacker, and like nobody's really surprised that Lawrence like didn't get this stuff done, but now he's missing. So what I love about this is that there's like the underlying threat of like, oh, a person from the keep has gone missing and we should worry about this. Maybe there's something weird going on. But then there's this like surface level emergency of like, we're planning a wedding and a person in the bridal party who had a very important job is gone and someone has to do it. So there's like the challenge of the sort of like everyday, well, okay, not every day, but like everyday kind of challenge of, oh, we have to get this job done. And then the more sinister, like, oh no, someone is missing. What are we going to do about it? So I like that dichotomy a lot. And then the rival. So I love, my favorite thing is the rival. Because I love that the scenario pack presents this kind of overarching scenario with all of these options, but by putting in the rival, you get to have additional threats and you can use them however you want. So like I love the way that Zach used his in his scenario. But in my scenario, the rival is also a member of the bridal party and is in fact the best man, and he's terrible. And he's the rival of Alba, the court spy. And he's just absolutely the worst. And so like, I think they've known each other like their whole lives, and she really hates him. And like, he's just a douche. And so he's like not at all a sinister character. Like he's not part of some like sweeping, like mystical threat. Like he's just a douche. And so the players have to like get a job done while dealing with this person who sucks, but they can't like send him away because he's the best man, and they have to keep the cousin happy because like it's his wedding. Anyway, So that's all happening on the surface level. Then, when I got to the end of the list, well, the second to last one on the list, which is, who is the Wildwoods ambassador? And I rolled in the form of an animal that appears half wolf and half lion. The ambassador prefers to avoid speaking directly to mortals. So I thought, okay, well, that's tough because all my characters are mortals. So what I'm going to do? And then it clicked in my mind because, of course, one of my players is a beast bound, has a special relationship with animals, and has an animal companion. So then I thought, what if the ambassador themselves is disguised as someone in the keep, but what if that person in the keep is not actually a person at all, but an animal? And so Raken, the beastbound, has the animal companion. His animal companion is a wild cat named Suna. Suna has a best friend who is a house cat named Margot. And the goblin ambassador, rather than disguising themselves as a person in the keep, disguise themselves as Margot the cat. So I took something that is like that is sinister, but then made it like a cat. So it's like, yeah, it like knocks things off the table. You know, there's so many like kind of mundane ways that can be a threat in planning a wedding. So I think it feeds into the idea that like the surface level conflict of this story is like hijinks, like silly things. Oh, planning a wedding, you know, is it going to happen? Are we going to like get these things done in time? But then underneath, there's actually a very serious story of like, this person is missing. We may have forgotten because we thought their job was more important than them, but actually they're missing. And it turns out that this like kind of douchey cat that is like knocking things over is actually this goblin ambassador in disguise. And from the first prompt, the reason the goblin ambassador is there is because the goblins are angry that they weren't consulted on this marriage, given that the cousin who's being married is part goblin. So I like the idea that like there is actually something really sinister going on underneath, but surface level, it's like really silly and, you know, hijinks. And so the plan is that like that all happens, and then the players will figure out that that there is something more going on, that this cat was actually not a cat all along, and so they will have to follow the goblin ambassador to the next thing that I rolled. So where does the Wildwoods ambassador wait for Barrow Keep's compliance? And I rolled a forgotten sacred cave within the cliffs overlooking the sea several hours west of the keep. The cave is easily visible from the beach, but paths up to the cliffs are hidden. And then for who guards the ambassador, because I think of those as being linked, I rolled predatory lunar wasps ferociously loyal to the ambassador. So then I had this idea. So the ambassador like doesn't want to talk to mortals, but is like animalistic. So at some point they're going to have to talk to the ambassador, right? Like it's going to come to a head. They're going to have to talk. So what if the ambassador is kind of like a reverse werewolf, and so only in the light of the full moon becomes like more humanoid, and then is willing to actually talk to all of these human characters. And so they end up having to follow the ambassador to this like sea cave where the light of the full moon streams in from the beach. And so then like standing there in the light, the ambassador like transforms from like cat to lion creature to humanoid goblin creature. And then they can have a conversation and they can actually deal with this. But of course, there are all of these dangerous things in the cave and the path there along the beach. So they'll like predatory, it says predatory lunar wasps, not like friendly lunar wasps. And I'm imagining various other creatures, sort of magical creatures that have dark vision, which of course the humans don't, and these kind of like so it becomes more sinister as they continue down this path, eventually getting to this what is essentially like a small dungeon where they have to confront this real dangerous villain that they kind of didn't they was in their midst the whole time, but they didn't really know because they discounted it because it was just a cat. So that's my plan.
Reverse werewolf is my favorite thing. I don't know how that hasn't happened already.
What I really loved is about how you used your rival as well. One turn deserves another. But I think what I really liked about like your scenario is the fact that you focused very much on your PC's interaction with the NPCs. Like I'm kind of like I was setting up scenarios and like keys, but like you actually have it very much tied in with the relationships that your PCs have with like their soulbound creature, or with like their interpersonal relationships within the keep, which I think is like it's definitely a great thing to set up and kind of watch the players knock down or run into.
Yeah, I love doing that as a DM, and I really like that on a number of the lists there are blanks to put in like the NPCs who the players have come up with. And then like you're still rolling, so you don't know what you're going to get, but you have a chance for the rivals. I think that's all blanks. So it's all NPCs who the players have come up with. You're going to end up with one of them. For the person who's gone missing, I think it's half blanks. So it's nice that like you can work in it. The system allows you to work in NPCs who are made by the characters, but also doesn't necessarily let the players know that that's going to happen. So like maybe their allies or their rivals will become a big part of the story, or like maybe they won't. And so the fact that they don't know to be prepared for it, I think makes it even more fun, because like I've experienced this as a player and also as a DM. Every time like something then is tied back to something that a player created, it's like the most exciting thing, and it's like the biggest surprise.
Oh yeah.
I also like how much the seemingly innocuous question, which feast are you preparing for, ended up flavoring your entire adventure, which it did for me too. And it's like a really interesting question. It like seems mundane, but like totally sets the tone for everything that you're doing. And like, there's a lot to feed off of there.
All right.
Yeah, I guess I can jump right into mine. So I had a handful of characters as well, which I'll kind of explain as I go, I guess. But since I was just talking about the feast, my first question, the random option that I rolled was you're preparing to greet a bunch of scholars who are flying in on an airship. And apparently while flying in, they like noticed these goblins in the deep forest, and the goblins are mad at them because of that. And maybe that gives them an angle over Barrow Keep itself. But to me, it's just really interesting that like this new foreign group of people is like coming into Barrow Keep. And I think that's a great place to start a story and start a setting. And it sets up a lot of, like potential rivals, like you said. It also sets up potential allies, but it's just like change. And I wanted to connect a lot of what I was doing to that. It also flavored for me a lot of what I wanted to do. The option that I rolled for who went missing was that someone was kind of led away by a paramour, which I also thought was really cool. And I think since there was this new group of scholars flying into town, it made sense to me that this is someone's like long distance lover, or like someone who they haven't seen in a long time, or have this relationship with they like shouldn't. Maybe it's secret. But I think that Cornelia, who has a close connection to the character Jade, or would be like the character that Jade created, maybe even has like a small crush on or something like that, would be really interesting to play with in terms of creating like a love triangle, or at least like creating tension between the characters and the NPCs, and playing with their bonds a little bit. And so they've gone missing, and there is a hunter inside of Barrow Keep that wants to go chase after them. But the rival that I said the players are dealing with is actually Evangelina, who is the leader of the scholars. And in my mind, these scholars came in two of like the trusted members of both factions sort of like go missing, and Evangelina like immediately offers to like go looking for them. But the paramour that led Cornelia away, I think I'd like to connect to my lost familiar character. So one of my characters is a lost familiar, meaning like they were once from some sort of like underworld or something like that, and they're kind of trying to hide from that past. And I like seeding that the paramour that led Jade's friend away is like dangerous, and that this lost familiar very much so knows it. What Jade and the Lost Familiar's relationship is like, I don't know, yet to be determined, but could definitely be fun stuff to play with there as well. And in my mind, so you sort of like go through all these like options and you're rolling different random stuff and you have ideas, and then some of the later options really help you to like fill in the gaps and connect the dots back and forth. Because in my mind, the hunter that is actually the Goblin Ambassador in disguise is going to be the NPC that attempts to talk the player characters into also going and searching for the lost lovers. And I think that the consort, who is connected to my ward of the consort, is very aware of like plots that the scholars have, of dangers in terms of the magic that this paramour that led Cornelia away may possess. I think the consort is not just a character that is connected to my character's playbook that is ward of the consort, but also sort of someone that all of the PCs can lean on, or is kind of like a NPC that is one of the closest NPCs to, or closest NPCs to the player characters. And I think that they would very much, with the hunter, want to like go after the scholars and make sure that they're not the only ones searching for the lost lovers. I think I picture this very much so being connected to the Dark Woods. I think that's definitely the trail that they're following. And the hunter, like I said, is the Goblin Ambassador in disguise. And my Goblin Ambassador that I rolled is a daunting ogre, but they're very reasonable and they're quick to listen. I think we've all played in games where like we had like a trusted NPC that like turns out to like, you know, betray and abandon us. But in my mind, the fact that this Goblin Ambassador in disguise is going to be close to the player characters, and is like specifically says in the options that I rolled, reasonable and quick to listen, means that there's a lot of interaction that they can have with a person who could end up being a villain to them, but is definitely a villain to Bear Keep. But who knows how that relationship evolves? Who knows what he learns about these player characters through interacting with them? Who knows how they might come to like the Goblin Ambassador. It gives them a chance to get to know him and potentially befriend him before everything is revealed, which I think would be really fun to play around with. If all that goes badly, I do imagine that they would also end up in an abandoned city. I rolled some of the same options as Zach did on the abandoned city with the Hungry Shades, so I think we're playing in the same universe maybe. But yeah, I think that's like the ultimate like penultimate like setting for this, like just a place far away from Bear Keep in the wilderness where the players don't feel safe. And maybe that will be them fighting the Goblin Ambassador. Maybe it'll be the Goblin Ambassador coming to their aid when this strange paramour with magical powers turns out to be dangerous. Maybe it's when the rival from the scholars turns out to be dangerous. There's like a lot of options, a lot of ways that it could go. And I think that's really fun.
I love that reversal. Like just, I always love kind of like the secret advisor who's actually like a demigod or something else trope. And just the idea of like having a wise ogre. You don't see too many of them, which I appreciate.
I love how much that plan like leaves it open for the players. So like I feel like you've created a story where like you really don't know which way they're going to go. Like are they going to decide to trust, like once they find out the truth, are they going to decide to trust that person, or are they going to decide like, no, you're my enemy, we have to fight? And I love that the scenario that you've created really works either way. And so you have like everything that you need to let the players make whatever decision they want to make and have their own agency. But like it's clear that you have it, like because of the way that scenario is played and because of like the things that you've come up with in your head, you have it ready for them no matter what they decide.
Yeah, and I think all of the questions lead you to just characters with motivations and places to find conflicts. And like as long as you have those two things, like the GM has the toolbox that they need to work with to create interesting stories without necessarily dictating what characters do. And all of this stuff is so connected to players that characters make or bonds that they already have, and that's seeded throughout it from the beginning, so you know that they're already hooked and you know that you can hook them in terms of the player motivations too. So it's really fun.
Guys, thank you. This has been fantastic to kind of see kind of how you three would all riff on this one scenario pack. And each scenario pack of the three that are going to be included kind of function in the same way. There's mysteries, there's things that kind of play on the players' bonds, things that kind of play onto things that have already shown up in their playbooks, and characters they've already sort of created for their backgrounds, and kind of space for those to fit those in.
I love how different all of our options ended up being too, actually. Yeah. It's really interesting to think about like replaying a scenario pack with a different group, because you could totally do that. You'd be somewhat familiar with like some of the basic conflicts, but like it would be completely fun and fresh every time you did it.
And not only that, you'd have like the moment where you kind of are agog at how different your one set of players played versus the other, which is always going to be great.
Yeah, definite replayability, not necessarily in the same campaign, but you can definitely get some repeat players coming back with different characters and seeing a very different scenario sort of fold out. And Justin, you were right. Like when I initially wrote the kind of what's going on at Barrow Keep question at the beginning of each of my scenario packs, just because I wanted to feel like everything that's going on is always against the backdrop of something else. But the way that kind of backdrop shapes everything going on and all the decisions people make has just been amazing. So it has been a lot of fun to work with and discover. So I think that kind of brings us to a wrap-up point. And I want to ask the three of you, I think people know where to find me online at this point. And it's right there on my Twitter IDs are right there for you to read. But Zach, where can people find you online, and anything you want to point them towards?
Absolutely. So on Instagram and Twitter, I am known as Great Zamino. You can find me. I play every Sunday. I play every other Sunday in a D&D campaign on Manapot Studios called The Exiled. I play a Tabaxi bard called Grand Finale. And that's a lot of fun. And this coming Sunday, I will actually be GMing my Invisible Sun campaign, which is a whole heck of a lot of fun. It's called The Hole in the World, and we're about to do a development mode session with one of the players while the other players are out at PAX East. So really looking forward to that, but also looking forward to when we get the full cast back in another 2 weeks after that. So good times.
Nice. Silviana, anything you want to kind of point people towards? Or
I'm not really online, so you probably can't find me, unfortunately. I'm sorry. Richard can find me next Monday when I DM for him, and probably don't kill him, but anything could happen.
There's all sorts of, we're in the Tomb of Annihilation, and there's a plethora of stupid decisions for us to make. And you wouldn't kill us, the dice would kill us.
Yeah.
If you kill them, people won't get their Kickstarters back. So at least wait until he's published the final file.
I'll try.
Bandit has been my character in 2 different GMs for 3 years now, and I'm an off. So I'm.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That's my favorite thing, is that Richard is now playing a character in my game that I played with when we were both players in another game. So I have like unique insight into the character. It's great.
And started as an NPC ally.
Yeah, it's true.
That's very cool.
And then Justin.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at SweaterPunks. I'll throw that out there. And then also, I also have a Kickstarter. So if you're looking to back 2 things, you can check mine out too. It's a game called Kunai Academy. It's about teenage ninjas in sort of a mystical setting. There's lots of fun cinematic combat, but also a lot of storytelling, a lot of collaborative world building. Like this as well. So yeah, I'll send out a link. Oh, thank you, Richard. You threw it out there for me. So yeah, check that out if you're interested in such things. And you can find me on Twitter if you ever want to say hi.
And just as an addendum to that, we actually at Manapod ended up doing a playtest of Kunai Academy, which went very well. And if you want to see that, it's on Twitch, but it'll probably be on YouTube soon.
And I've been a playtester for Kunai Academy and it is one of my favorite characters. Muto is the conniving, the good-hearted but conniving.
The unassuming and yet maybe the criminal mastermind of the whole campaign. Yeah.
Look, in a criminal capitalist economy, somebody has to stand up for what's right. Guys, thank you so much. It has been great to have all of you online, and I hope to see all of you very, very soon. And thanks. And we are just $600 away from getting a raise for all of the collaborators on Barrow Keep. So please, if you're thinking about it, please back. Bye, guys.
Have a great night. Bye.